Hello, my name is Senior Master Sergeant Rick Detlinger. I am the Air Force Aircraft Metals Technology Program Office Superintendent, and lately I've been getting a lot of phone calls from field units asking how do they set up their SSI data logger and how do they actually perform some surveys. So I have decided to create a series of 3 short videos that's going to show you guys number 1, how to set up your data logger, number 2, how to download data from your data logger to your computer, and number 3, how to actually run a survey. This first video is going to cover actually setting up your data logger. We're going to walk through the menus of the data logger and actually fill them out one at a time so you can actually input the data that you need to be able to perform a survey. The next thing we're going to do is go through and set up a survey template. While we're in there, we're going to edit our template, input some changes, and save those changes so that you'll be able to actually run a survey. And then finally in this video, we are going to show you how to build some thermocouples. We'll actually get some thermocouple wire out, twist the ends up so you get a good connection, and then show you how to connect them to your data logger. So with all that being said, and any further ado, let's get started. Alright, so this is the SSI SDS 8120 portable data logger that we have stock listed for use in the Air Force Metals Technology sections. I already have mine turned on, and this is your basic home screen. All you're going to do when you receive your data logger is get it out of the box, plug it in, make sure it's fully charged. It has a light on the right hand side that turns green and red. Red is charging, green is fully charged. Once you get it fully charged, simply flip the power switch to the on position. The software will boot up and load and do its thing, and it'll bring you to this home screen right here. One thing I recommend everybody do is print the manual in booklet form. So the manual comes electronically on the CD, and you can also download it from the SSI website. But I think to save you a lot of time and being tethered to a computer while you try to operate this data logger, go into the print menu, select booklet format, and then print it out like this, right? It'll end up being fairly thick, about a 1/4 inch thick or so, but it'll give you a handy quick reference that you can stick inside your data logger pouch and have with you whenever you have questions about how to operate your data logger. So it's pretty basic setup, really. You have a little clipboard, you have a stylus for making selections on your screen, you have your 4 banks for thermocouples. This data logger is capable of holding 20 thermocouples, and you'll have 5 thermocouples per bank. When you guys look at your data logger, and later on we'll go into more depth in this, but you have bank 1 that has thermocouples 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bank 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, bank 3, so on and so forth. These banks on here correspond to your screen up top, and so I will show you that once I zoom in on the actual screen itself. So I'm going to do a little bit of manipulation just so I can get the screen centered and zoom in a little bit so it's large enough for you all to see. Okay, so what we are going to do, we're going to run through the menus. So as I already said, the banks on your data logger correspond to your screen. So this is bank 1, bank 2, bank 3, bank 4. Those thermocouples, there's thermocouple 1 through 5 on bank 1, 6 through 10 on bank 2, 11 through 15 on bank 3, and then 16 through 20 on bank 4. That will become, it'll make more sense, become more obvious to you once you start doing it. Please do not confuse this grid with being input 1, 2, 3, 4 as thermocouple 1, 2, 3, 4. These are your banks, these are your actual thermocouple inputs. So you have to be smart enough to calculate in your own mind that this is, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 through 20. Alright, moving on. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go into our menu. So you'll take your stylus, you can also use your finger, but the stylus is just far more accurate. Touch menu. Once you're in the menu, the first thing that you see is survey, and then instrument information, chart scaling, view input types, view offsets, select input channels, edit input types, edit offsets, spool correction, and about. The primary menus that we're going to use here is survey. The survey is actually what you're going to use to operate the data logger, and then instrument information is exactly what it says. Chart scaling is how we're going to change the amount of data that is displayed on our charts. The larger the area you have, the less fine detail you can actually see. The smaller area that you choose to represent, the greater detail you're going to see. View input types, view offsets, all that is just for checking stuff. It's a simple way to view without creating the opportunity to change things. You don't want to mess things up. So it's really simple user interface. If you just really read what you're looking at and select it, as long as you can read, you're good to go. These three menus here, edit input types, edit offsets, and spool correction, are going to be actual menus where you can change things. The login tab down here, for Standard Metals Tech purposes, we're never really going to use that. The people that will change your login tab is going to be PML. So for our purposes, you're really never going to need to touch that button. The term detail is the equivalent of enter. So whenever you touch or whenever you make a menu selection, you have to touch detail. So for example, if we wanted to edit input types, we would touch edit input types detail, also known as enter. So if we want to edit input types, we touch edit input types detail, and that takes you to the details of that menu. So we'll talk more about that later. I'm going to return to my main menu and continue on with the lesson. The last tab down here, real time, that will take you to a screen where it shows you exactly what your thermocouples are reading in real time. As you set your intervals and your offsets, this will read temperature, and it will change periodically by a tenth of a degree or half a degree, whatever the fluctuations in your ambient air temperature is, it will reflect. Right now it's showing 2372 for every single thermocouple in there. 2372 is the default reading for no reading. If it shows 2372, that means you are not getting any data to this data logger, which is obvious right now because I do not have any thermocouples hooked up. I don't even have any of the bank terminals plugged in, so we're not getting any readings whatsoever. The chart takes you to, as it states, a chart where you can actually view the trend that your heat treating oven or whatever type of temperature you're trying to track. You have various options in here: zoom in, zoom out. You can move the chart sideways. You can jump it way forward, jump it way back. You can change the scale on here. It's exactly what it says, a chart. The greatest thing about this chart, at least for me, I'm not a big fan of the chart, but you can touch this little grid looking button right here that takes you to an Excel type spreadsheet. So for me, I prefer seeing the numbers over the chart because like I explained earlier with your chart scaling, if you don't have your chart scaling set properly, it becomes really hard to see the fine details that we are trying to measure to. We're trying to go plus or minus 20, and each one, I'm sorry, plus or minus 10 for a class 2. But anyway, each one of these, you can see from 340 to 380, there's approximately 5 lines there, give or take, and each one of those lines might be 10 degrees. So it seems like it'd be fairly easy to differentiate if you're good or bad, but numbers don't lie. Graphs and charts can be a little bit misleading. So hit the X to get back out of that. Puts us back into real time. So I'm going to go back into my menu, touch menu, and it brings us back to where we can actually make some changes. So the survey tab, I'm going to go ahead and touch it. We'll work our way from top to bottom. The survey tab, notice I selected it, nothing happens. I must push detail if I want to go into the survey tab. But the survey tab is where you will actually run your survey. Now, you guys, when you first receive it, will probably be completely blank. I have gone in on my computer and created a survey template, and I have options so that I can quickly load different templates. You guys, being that you are assigned to one base, or I should say your data logger is assigned to one base, you should really never have to have multiple templates. Unless of course you want to. You can create templates for your various temperatures for your surveys and quickly load them that way. Or you can just do basic edits. You can edit your template on the data logger, which is just as quick, and you can do it right there at the point of survey. So we will come back to the survey template later, but right now we're going to go back to the primary menu, and so since I want to return to the primary menu, I will touch the return button. Next one, instrument information, touch detail to go into that menu. Model number, I'm charging, so on and so forth, right? For the purposes of this video, it's not really important, but if you ever have to make a service call back to SSI or something like that, they may ask you some of the questions from this instrument information menu. Chart scaling, talked about that a little bit already. You can change how much or how small of the area of your chart you're going to actually see. Right now I have it set for 500 to 300 degrees. I was most likely running a survey at 375, give or take, and so I wanted to see, basically I wanted my data line to be in the center of my survey chart. So if we want to change it, you simply touch the number, it pulls up the menu. Let's say I want to go to 1,000. I type in the number I want to have, click OK, it saves it. I want to change the min, I touch it, it pulls it up. Let's make it, I don't know, 800. You can tell I'm kind of partial to 200 degree spreads, but and that's it. So I've saved the max, the min for my chart scaling. 1,000 is the max, 800 is the min. Click save, and then it should take me out of this menu. There we go. So it puts us back into the main menu where we can move on. View input types. Now again, as I already said, I've just kind of gone in here and I've either tried to reset my data logger back to factory inputs, or I've just changed things altogether so that as we go into later menus, I'm forced to make changes so that you guys can see how it actually works. So right now, I'm set up for running type N thermocouples, which we're not going to use. We're going to primarily use type K. All of you should have type K thermocouples, so later on in this video, we will actually change this to say type K. If you have your thermocouple set incorrectly in your data logger as compared to the thermocouple you are actually using, it will not read correctly. Okay, next one is view offsets. Your offsets in this menu are for individual thermocouples. So if you choose to pay a higher price and have individually calibrated thermocouples, what they call a point calibration. Let's say you want to buy 10 individual thermocouples, each 20 feet long, and you want a point calibration on each one of those thermocouples at 200, 400, 600, 800 degrees, so on and so forth. When you are going to run a survey, whatever survey set point you choose, you would have to input the offset for that thermocouple range in this chart. Right here, we're just viewing them, but later on we can actually go in and change individual offsets. Here's an example of an individual thermocouple where you can see it actually has, sorry for the shaky hands, let me just put it down. So you can actually see the first one, 400 degrees, the actual temperature was 398.4, the correction factor is plus 1.6. So if we were going to run a survey and use this thermocouple as thermocouple number 1, we would have to input a correction factor or an offset of plus 1.6. And I'll show you more about that later. But you can see with this thermocouple, these are all of the point calibrations, all the different temperatures that this thermocouple was subjected to for calibration. That makes your survey far more accurate. However, for our purposes, we are primarily going to use spool thermocouples because they meet the intent of AMS 2750 and they're much cheaper. Alright, returning to the main menu. So as you can see, this is often not the fastest. Okay, so we just viewed input types, we viewed our offsets. Next, select input channels. Now I've gotten a few calls on this one. Select input channels, touch detail to go into that menu. I get a lot of phone calls about, well, I'm not getting any data from my data logger whatsoever. Well, you have to go in and turn on your input channels. So we will select the input channel option from the main menu, and then you can see right now I have no inputs. As we already covered, this is bank 1, bank 2, bank 3, bank 4, thermocouples 1 through 5 on bank 1, 6 through 10 on bank 2, 11 through 15 on bank 3, and 16 through 20 on bank 4. So we'll go in, we'll touch select inputs. You got cancel, select, deselect, OK. So all you're going to do is you're going to touch input 1, touch select, touch input 2, select. You're going to repeat that process for your first 9 thermocouples at a minimum. You're required to have 9 thermocouples so you can input 9 thermocouples. If you select more than 9 thermocouples and you don't read, or I should say you don't use 9 thermocouples in your survey, you're going to get an error. If you select 10, 11, 12 thermocouples and you only use 9 thermocouples, you're going to get an error, right? Because you're telling your data logger that you should be receiving data for, let's just say, 10 thermocouples, right? More data is better. However, not always the case. If you want to gather more data, that's great, but just make sure that you have the amount of thermocouples that you attach to your data logger actually match your inputs that you select right here. If you go through and you select 10 and you go, oh man, I only want 9, well then you just touch 10 again and then click the select deselect button. You touch it once, it selects it, you touch it again, it'll deselect it. Once you have your 9 inputs turned on, select OK. Now it's reading 9 thermocouples. As you can see, it's reading 2,372 degrees. That's the default for no data, right? There's no signal coming into those 9 channels. So we are done. We can actually receive a signal once we connect thermocouples to our 9 inputs, so we are good to go. Alright, next section is going to be edit input types. So you touch edit input types in detail, and then you come here where you can actually make some changes. Right now all 20 sections, all 20 inputs are set for type N, and so I want to select type K. Little drop down menu, select K, range start, TC1, range end. I'm going to just default all 20 to type K. I'm really only required to change 9 to type K, but just so I don't make a mistake, right? I'm just going to select all 20. So after you get all 20 selected, touch set range input types. You can see they've all changed to K. I'll just scroll back up just to verify that they are all indeed K. They are all K. I am happy. So we got type K in the entire chart, set K there, range start 1, range end 20. It's good to go. Return. Next menu, edit offsets. This will take us into actually inputting individual thermocouple offsets. But again, like I said, you're most likely going to be using a spool offset. If you bought your thermocouples in a spool, a large roll, 100 to 200 feet or so on, this menu will not pertain to you. But if you bought individual thermocouples and they are individually calibrated, you will have to go in and edit your offsets based on each individual thermocouple. So let's say, for example, I'm going to run a survey at 375 degrees. My closest point calibration to 375 is 400. So at 400 degrees, I had, we'll go back to this card over here. Reach over and get it. Go back to this card. At 400 degrees, my temp was 398.4. So I have to have an offset, which means this thermocouple actually reads low. So I need a correction factor of positive 1.6. So when I go select input 1, offset value, I'm going to touch the offset value. It will bring up the next menu, my target value. If you want to input a positive number, you simply touch the numbers that you want. If you want to input a negative number, you have to touch the positive negative button first. It brings up a little negative, and then you can input your data. However, in this scenario, I'm going to escape because my negative sign didn't go away. So I'm going to walk back out. Negative sign's gone. I'm going to input 1.6. So for thermocouple 1, I have an offset of positive 1.6. Let's say my next thermocouple number 2, it had an offset of 0.5 degrees. So thermocouple input number 2, offset value, positive 0.5 degrees. Save. My next input, thermocouple number 3, came back and had a negative offset, right? So I want to touch negative. Well, let's say it came back negative 2 degrees. Oops. Clear it. Negative 2. Okay. Negative 2. So you can see each individual thermocouple has independent offsets based on my point calibration. So this is what you would have to do if you chose to go the more accurate, more expensive route of individually point calibrated thermocouples, but again, not necessary. So I'm going to clear these offsets, put it back to 0, and return back to the main menu. This is where we are going to primarily live. So touch spool correction, touch detail, may go to the next menu, and let me explain spool correction to you. When you ordered your thermocouples, it should have came in looking something like this, right? It's a spool of thermocouple. Depending upon what size you bought, it might be smaller. This is a 500-foot spool, and it is calibrated to within plus or minus, I think it's minus 4 degrees, but the requirement for spool calibration is plus or minus 4 degrees. Mine came in, it has a little data sticker on it where you can see mine is exactly negative 4 degrees at 392. So for our purposes, that is good enough. There's some data on here that we're going to plug in a little bit later on. You got your part number, your lot number, inspector code, inspection date, length, all that kind of good stuff. Spool ID and our offset is what we're going to actually be concerned with. So again, my spool correction or spool offset is negative 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So I will enter that into my chart. So degrees Fahrenheit, you can actually change that to Celsius if you like, but we're sticking with Fahrenheit. Set spool correction. Negative 4. Okay. And again, that negative 4 came right from my spool. Yours is going to be whatever it is, plus or minus 4 degrees. That is the requirement. What I have found is the larger the spool that you purchase, the less accurate your calibration is. Again, accurate being 0, less accurate being farther from 0. I recommend you guys buy your spools in 200 feet or less, and you should get calibration accuracies of plus or minus between 1 and 3 degrees. The small spools that I've seen that are 50 feet, those are going to be, I've seen those coming calibrated plus or minus 0.3. One thing I want to add with your thermocouple corrections, If you buy a whole spool of 200 feet, then you're going to use a spool correction, provided every single thermocouple came off of that spool. If you start mixing and matching spool thermocouples, let's say you bought 4 spools of 50 feet each. Well, each one of those individual 50-foot spools is going to have a different spool calibration. So at that point, you need to go into your offsets for your individual thermocouples, and let's say you had thermocouples 1 through 5 came from spool 1, and thermocouples 6 through 9 came from spool 2. Well, you would enter your offset for spool 1 for all thermocouples 1 through 5 here, and then you'd enter your offsets for spool 2 for thermocouples 6 through 9. Hopefully that makes sense. I really didn't confuse you, but you can give me a call. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so that is the primary menu. Once you have all that data input, for the most part, once you go into you go in and select your input channels, select the first 9, edit your input types, which was type K thermocouples, and you input your spool correction from your individual spool of thermocouples, you are good to go. From that point, you will be actually ready to go into the survey template and do some settings there. So I touch survey detail and it pulls this up. Okay, our options from here are we can load a survey template that we have created from our computer, or we can edit the template that we see here. So what we are going to do is we are going to edit the template that is already loaded into the data logger. Now I've gone through here and I've zeroed out a lot of these values so that we can input them together. This is pretty much going to work the same as the previous menu. When you touch something, it's going to open that menu. So the operator, you have to input your name. Operator, edit, and so put in your name. I'm just going to go with my name, Detlinger. Normally I'd put Charles Detlinger, first and last name I recommend, but for the sake of time, just input my last name. Tolerance, touch edit. Now your tolerance obviously is a plus or minus, but you're just going to put in your value. The data logger already knows that it's shooting for a plus or minus. If you try and put in a negative, it takes it, it'll put the little negative sign up there, but you can't put anything in there. Anything you touch defaults to 0, right? So if you're trying to put in a negative tolerance like -10 plus 0, it's not going to let you do that. So so I clear out that, and let's just say we're going to shoot for a class 2 tolerance plus or minus 10 degrees. So I'm going to enter 10 and OK. So our tolerance value is 10 degrees. The data logger knows it's plus or minus 10. Spool number, edit. As we already said, this comes off of your spool, and so my spool ID, if I can get it in here, is 072711. So I'm going to enter that in there. 072711. Enter, and we're moving on. Active thermocouples. Touch it, select edit. Now here we're going to actually turn on the inputs for our survey. So earlier we turned on a certain amount of channels. You can actually go through and turn on all 20 if you like, but I still recommend doing 9 on the first menu and then 9 in this menu as well. It works the exact same way. Go through, touch each number, and select afterwards. I'm going to input 9 thermocouples. 1 through 9, selected, press OK. Controller manufacturer. This is going to come from your oven controller. Most of us probably have a Honeywell. However, input this based on what type of manufacturer is on your oven. Controller model, touch it, touch edit, I want to say the most common one is going to be UDC 2500. But again, make sure you look at your controller model and input that data. Instrument type. Instrument type for 99% of ovens at the field level is going to be instrument type D. What that means is that you have basically 3 thermocouples inside your oven that are registering data. You have one thermocouple that reads your actual oven temperature. You have one thermocouple that is reading your overtemp, right? So if it hits a certain point, it triggers your overtemp alarm and it shuts your oven down. And your third thermocouple is set to simply record data and feed it to your digital recording instrument, ideally, or if not, your old paper chart recorder. So most of us are going to have instrument type D. That you should be able to find that on your controller based upon like the things I just said. You're going to have a minimum 2 thermocouples, right? Because you're going to have your oven temperature thermocouple, you're going to have your overtemp, and I have seen ovens that don't have a chart recorder, and I've seen ovens that have higher classes of instrumentation, be it A or B. So anyway, you can't go wrong with a type D. I'd be willing to bet that 99% of us have type D, but I have seen lesser instrument types. But for the sake of this video, input type D. Cycle time, deadband, output limit, PB gain. These are all things that you're going to input if desired. They are not required as per the AMS 2750, but this data logger has been built to meet higher standards such as Boeing or Lockheed. So with that being said, what we have input here are the bare minimum requirements as per running a temperature uniformity survey. So the last thing that we're going to put in is your survey set point. We said earlier we're going to do 375, so I'll touch set point, edit, and input 375, touch OK. Okay, we have all that. It's all input. We input operator, our survey tolerance, 10 degrees, right? 10 plus or minus 10. TC spool number from your individual spool of thermocouples. Thermocouple correction. I think we skipped right by that. Earlier we said it was -4. Okay. And active thermocouples 1 through 9. Just verify that one more time. 1 through 9. Okay. Controller manufacturer, controller model, instrument type, and finally our set point. So we're going to click save, and we're back to our survey menu. Alright, from here, if we had thermocouples connected, we could actually press on and be ready to run a survey, right? We're in the shop, we got everything hooked up to our data logger, our rack's ready to go, we're ready to run a survey. We're not going to get into that right now, but with the 2 things that we have just done, with setting up our data logger and then editing our survey template, we could very well choose to start a survey if we were in the shop and had thermocouples hooked up and ready to go. But for the sake of this video, we are going to return to the main menu, and we are going to assemble some thermocouples. Alright, so the one thing that I want to caution you on is setting up your thermocouples is pretty easy. However, the one thing you have to keep in mind, and this is coming out of TO 1-1-690, your thermocouples don't read like, or they're not, the polarity is not like standard battery terminals or anything like that. So in this case, your red is negative. So in your car, your vehicle battery, red would be positive, right? Well, don't think that like all these colors go together, because for some reason they don't. So for the type K thermocouple, your red wire is negative, your yellow wire is positive. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, for these thermocouples, they all have an outer sheath. See if you can see that. Let me move this away a little bit. So for these thermocouples, they're all going to have an outer sheath. That's your high temp silica coating. And then once you get to the actual thermocouple itself, they're going to have each individual wire is individually wrapped, and they have color strands in there. Okay, so those color strands you can actually see once you strip back some of the protective coating and expose the bare wire. Your yellow cable right here, your yellow lead is positive, and your red lead is negative. Now what I recommend you guys do is once you expose that, this coating is pretty flimsy, and so I recommend that you do at least what we do. It's a recommendation. You don't have to, but if you don't, you eventually will follow my advice. Take some electrical tape or some kind of tape or something and wrap it around the ends to keep them from fraying. But definitely leave enough of that cable out, that colored wire, so that you know what's what. Okay, so we have some tape here on the far ends. The end is going to actually connect to the data logger so that they don't fray over time. Alright, so very simply, when you have your thermocouple stripped out like I do there, and you have your wires exposed, you have to get out one of your thermocouple banks. Right now, what I highly recommend is once you guys get your thermocouples connected into these banks, you don't disconnect them, or you don't actually unscrew them and take them out of this terminal. I recommend you get one bank, or bank 1 of thermocouple 1 through 5, get it all assembled and ready to go, and then you install it and leave it in there so that when you are not running a survey, you pull out the whole bank, but all your thermocouples are attached. That will look something like this, right? So you have it all connected, they're permanently in there, and you're good to go. Disregard that tape. That tape is just for us because we travel around so much. We have to take kind of extreme measures to keep all the individual wires from touching, because if they touch, it will kind of give you erroneous readings. You guys will not have the same problem because you're more stationary. A lot of our stuff gets kind of subjected to more use and abuse and wear and tear. So, as I said, your red is negative, your yellow is positive, and so you would take this, plug it into your bank like so. It clicks in there, and then you should have received a little screwdriver tool from SSI. One little trick with this that you may or may not know, you can pull that out and you have a standard and you have a Phillips end, and you can insert that into the tip for whatever end you need. So that was pretty neat. Alright, plugging them up is pretty simple. All you got to do is insert the tips into the actual ends here and tighten it down. So one thing I want to caution you on is to make sure that your box, so you should see number 4 there from the left moving up, right? I've seen people make mistakes where they're not fully aware that, see, now it's opening, so you want to insert your thermocouple into that hole and then in turn tighten it, and it'll draw that little piece of metal up and provide your pinch point and hold it securely. I've seen people make mistakes where they have it kind of just like so, where they don't see this hole here, all they see is the bottom. They insert their thermocouple in there and then proceed to tighten it. It gets tight and they think, alright, good to go, it's locked in. but it's not. You're totally missing the connection, and then they have erroneous readings, or it touches, right, and it's actually giving them some readings until they make a slight movement with the thermocouple, and then they lose the reading. So pretty straightforward. Again, this is it's not rocket science, but what can go wrong will go wrong, and so that's why I bring that up. Attention to detail. So again, your red is negative, so you simply take the red, put it into the negative slot, positive into the positive slot, hold it in place, tighten it up. Now once we get this one connected, we will go into our real-time menu, and then we should be getting a data reading, an ambient air temperature data reading for input number 1. Bank 1, thermocouple 1. So we are going to go, move this back down. So we are going to go back into real time and see what we see for thermocouple number 1. Let me close this chart. 73.5 degrees. So there you go, proof in the pudding. You see I hooked up one thermocouple, it's reading ambient air temperature, you see it just switched. You know, these things are so sensitive that if you have it in an airstream, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but the heat or the air is kicking right now. It's going to change as air fluctuates. If I take it and I hold it between my fingers and I rub it, right, generate some heat, you should see it jump up. There you go. So you can see I'm just kind of manually manipulating it now, and you know, friction causes heat, so there you go. It jumped up to 85.4. So that is how you connect a thermocouple. Let me show you one cool little thing that we use. If you just want to practice gathering data, one thing that we have here is we have a little series of jumper cables, right? And this is just standard electrical wiring that we've rigged up here, courtesy of SSI, and has the exposed wire tip there, and it just comes in bank 1, and then we just jumped each terminal all the way through 5 to mirror essentially whatever bank 1 sees. So let me plug this in, and you guys will see that now we have 5 inputs, right? 5 actual points of data going to our data logger, and so we will see, there you go, 5 numbers registering right now. And since I was just holding this, it's still a little warm, but it's also not a thermocouple, right? So you saw when I plugged in my thermocouple, it was reading 74 point something degrees, and it's a type K thermocouple. This is not a thermocouple, and so the readings are different because the frequency of the signal sent back of the material makeup, right? The metal compounds in this wire are different from the thermocouple wire, so therefore the electrical signal that's generated is different. So that's why the temperatures aren't as accurate as what we were just showing. So the last thing I have to show you, now that I've showed you how to connect the thermocouple, you will repeat that process times 9. I'm going to show you how to create a thermocouple. So let me zoom this back out a little bit. We will actually create a thermocouple. I'm just going to cut one here, and then we'll create a thermocouple. So for what I do, you have a couple options, right? You can buy an expensive thermocouple welder, about $5,000. Not necessary. Or you can TIG them together. You can TIG your ends, which you would just, get the two tips real close together. You can manually twist them together by hand, and then just run a TIG torch on low amps and fuse the tips. Or you can do what I'm about to do here and just use good old safety wire pliers and regular pliers. So I'm going to cut this end off just because I don't need it anymore. You can actually see that tight twist that I got there. Try and get it close, hopefully it'll focus. But there you go. That's a safety wire twist. Right, so if you twisted it by hand, you see it's kind of very loose and doesn't really read really well. So now that I've cut it, I have two separate thermocouple ends there. Just going to get them close together, get them touching, take my safety wire pliers and pinch the tips, squeeze it, lock that in place. Okay, it's pinching. I'm going to take a set of normal pliers and hold the other end, but I want to get them close together as well. I'm just going to pull my safety wire pliers, right? Pull that lever and get it twisting up. Give it 3, 4, 5 pulls. Release it, and then you have a nice tight twist for registering. I don't think it's reading. For registering your readings. Now these thermocouples actually read at the twist closest to the end that makes your connection into your data logger. So if you have that long of a twist, that twist there, just to give you some scale, it's probably about an inch, inch and a quarter or so. If you only want to have a ½ inch exposed, you can always cut it off, and now you got a nice tight, concise twist. I believe the TUS says a quarter, so if you want to get to a quarter, boom, there you go, 1/4 inch. Just that easy. The beauty of the twist method that I like is if you get an erroneous reading, right, you start seeing data on your data logger getting a little bit skewed, then just get out your safety wire pliers, give it a couple tugs, and retighten that twist, and you will generally fix your reading. So I know this is about a 45-minute video, a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I want to be very thorough, and so this concludes video number 1, setting up the data logger. We walk through the menus, input the key data that you need to set up your data logger, and then we set up a basic survey template, and finally built some thermocouples. One question I get a lot is the TO says my thermocouple has to be between 10 and 100 feet. Well, make it between 10 and 100 feet. You know, 10 feet might sound like a lot to you. 100 is definitely a lot, but I would generally make my thermocouples about 15 feet. Once you actually attach them to your rack, put your rack in your oven, run the wires, you know, a decent distance to allow your data logger to sit freely on a workbench or on a cart or whatever, you know, stable object you're going to set it on while you run your survey. 10 feet is really the minimum that you're going to want to need. Anywhere from 10 to 15 is what I recommend, and you'll be good to go to have plenty of space to run your wires into your oven and have a place where you can comfortably set your data logger and operate it. So that concludes video number 1. If you guys have any questions, you can call the Metals Technology office at DSN 472-4773 or commercial 478-222-4773. Again, I am Senior Master Sergeant Detlinger, and this concludes this video. Thanks for watching.